Picture her hands. Flour worked into the creases of her knuckles, a dish towel slung over one shoulder, the back of her wrist pushing a stray curl off her forehead while something low and slow went golden in the oven. Lean across the table with me for a minute, because that kitchen is closing. Most of these 40 recipes had vanished from the average American supper table before the takeout bag became the family centerpiece, somewhere in the slow drift from the 1950s onward, when Swanson sold over 10 million of those aluminum tray TV dinners in a single year by the Smithsonian's telling, and the home cook quietly set down her wooden spoon. Around number 22, there's a pie made almost entirely of crackers that fooled grown men at the dinner table. The top 3 are dishes so tied to a specific grandmother that taste them once and you'd weep. And these aren't fancy. These are church basement, stretch a dollar, Sunday after service plates. Let's count them down, one by one, before the recipe cards crumble for good. Here's the thing worth saying before we start. Gently and once, because some of these dishes carry real history about home canning and pork butchering days. Modern food safety guidance today would flag a few of the old methods, and where it matters, I'll say so plainly, as history and never as a how-to. But mostly, this is about loss, not danger. The loss of a particular kind of cooking that happened when nobody was watching. The clock, when a recipe lived in a grandmother's memory and not on a glowing screen. And when supper was a verb, the whole family conjugated together. As convenience food climbed, by most accounts, these long, hands-on dishes slipped first, because they asked for the one thing the modern family stopped having, which was an afternoon. If your own grandmother made even one of these, and you feel that pull in your chest, do me a small kindness and tap subscribe so this kitchen stays open a while longer. Now, pull your chair in. Let's begin. Number 40. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Listen for the hiss as the milk hits the hot roux, that white sauce going glossy and thick while paper-thin slivers of salty dried beef curl and soften inside it. This was a Depression survivor that marched straight into mid-century kitchens, a dish of pure thrift, dried beef being shelf-stable and cheap when fresh meat strained the budget. Grandma ladled it steaming over torn toast, a plate that fed 4 for the price of 1. Soldiers knew it by a saltier nickname. Mothers knew it as Tuesday. It faded when canned and frozen convenience meals offered the same speed without the standing and stirring. And now, most folks under 50 have never tasted that velvety, peppery comfort. Stretch a dollar, feed a family, and never once apologize for it. Number 39. Scalloped potatoes from scratch. Not the boxed kind. The real thing, where she sliced russets paper-thin with a paring knife, and a steady thumb, layering them into a buttered dish with flour, salt, dots of butter, and milk poured to the brim. An hour later, the top came out, blistered and bronze, the edges crusty and caramelized, the inside tender and bubbling. This was Sunday dinner architecture, built slow, built by hand. It faded when the boxed, scalloped potato mix promised the same look in 20 minutes, and the patience of slicing by hand became a thing only grandmothers still chose to do. Real ones remember the difference. Number 38. Salmon croquettes. There's a satisfying snap to a good croquette, that crackling shell giving way to a soft, flaky inside flecked with onion and parsley. Canned salmon, a beaten egg, crushed crackers, a squeeze of lemon, shaped into patties by hand and fried in a cast-iron skillet until golden and fragrant. By most accounts, this was the frugal Friday supper across much of America, canned salmon being cheaper than fresh and always in the cupboard. Grandma served them with a dab of homemade tartar and a wedge of lemon. They slipped away as fish sticks and frozen fillets arrived ready to bake, and the gentle ritual of mashing and shaping a croquette by hand simply stopped. Number 37. Tomato aspic. Now we wander toward the strange and the beautiful. Picture a trembling, jewel-red mold turned out onto a lettuce leaf, glossy and cool, set with gelatin and seasoned with tomato juice, a little vinegar, a whisper of celery salt. Recipes for tomato aspic appear in American cookbooks well before the war, one documented version dating to 1943, and it carried straight into the 1960s as a sophisticated salad course. Grandma served it on her good plate at the Bridge Club. It quivered, it glistened, and it vanished as tastes turned away from savory gelatin, leaving behind only a memory of that cold, tart, surprising first bite. Number 36. Liver and onions. The hiss of onions hitting hot fat, going soft and sweet and translucent, draped over thin slices of beef liver browned just to the edge of tender. This was an organ meat economy dish, liver being one of the cheapest cuts at the butcher and a way to honor the whole animal. Grandma dredged the slices in seasoned flour and didn't overcook them because she knew the line between tender and rubber. It was a weeknight staple across working-class kitchens. As tastes shifted and organ meats fell out of fashion, this one quietly left the menu. And now, whole generations have never smelled those onions caramelizing low and slow. Number 35. Homemade chicken and dumplings. Cue the smell. A whole hen simmered for hours until the broth turned golden and rich, the meat falling from the bone, and then pillowy dumplings dropped into steam under a lid until they swelled tender and light. This was stretch-a-dollar genius, one bird feeding a crowd by way of broth and flour. Grandma made the dumplings by feel, flour, and a little fat, and just enough buttermilk, rolling and cutting or simply pinching them off. It was Sunday in a pot. It faded as rotisserie chickens and canned soup shortcuts replaced the long simmer, and the dumplings made from memory grew rare. Keep this one close. We've got 34 to go, and the pot's just getting warm. Number 34. Stuffed bell peppers. Bright green peppers, tops sliced off, hollowed and filled with a savory mix of ground beef, rice, onion, and tomato. Then baked until the peppers slumped tender and the tops blistered. This was a thrifty, complete meal in an edible bowl, popular through the mid-century when ground beef stretched far and rice filled the rest. Grandma crowned each one with a cap of tomato sauce. They faded as families chased faster suppers, and the patience of stuffing and baking gave way to the skillet and the drive-thru. Number 33. Pan-fried okra. Listen for the sizzle. Sliced okra rolled in cornmeal and dropped into shimmering hot fat, frying up crisp and golden with a tender bite inside. A southern garden staple, born of the home vegetable patch and the cast-iron skillet, it carried the flavor of summer suppers when the okra came in faster than anyone could eat it. Grandma fried it in bacon grease, saved in a tin by the stove. It slipped from northern and urban tables first, as garden plots shrank and frozen vegetables took the skillet's place, surviving mostly in southern kitchens, where the cornmeal crust is still a point of pride. Number 32. Bread pudding. Don't waste a crumb. That was the whole soul of this dish. Stale bread torn and soaked in a custard of eggs, milk, sugar, and cinnamon, then baked until the top turned crusty and the inside stayed soft and fragrant. It was a thrift dessert, born to rescue the heel of the loaf, and it warmed Sunday tables across every region. Grandma poured a little vanilla sauce or a splash of bourbon over hers. It faded as packaged desserts and bakery cakes made the homemade pan feel old-fashioned, and the habit of saving stale bread for Sunday quietly ended. Number 31. Succotash. Corn and lima beans simmered together with butter, maybe a little cream, maybe a strip of salt pork for depth. The name comes from a Narragansett word, and the dish itself is one of the oldest in the American kitchen, a meeting of indigenous and colonial cooking. Grandma made it from the garden in late summer when both crops came ripe at once. It was a humble sweet, buttery side. It faded as fresh shelling beans disappeared from stores, and the frozen mix, while convenient, lost the long, slow tenderness of the homemade pot. Number 30. Pot roast with the works. The low hum of an oven all afternoon. A tough, cheap chuck roast braised for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the meat surrendered into strands and the gravy thickened from the drippings alone. This was the Sunday centerpiece of working families everywhere, a way to turn the least expensive cut into the most beloved meal of the week. Grandma started it after church, and it was ready by mid-afternoon. It faded as the long braise lost out to faster proteins and restaurant dinners, and the smell that once filled a whole house on Sunday grew rare. Some things you can't rush, and this was one of them. Number 29. Homemade noodles. Flour, eggs, a pinch of salt, and a rolling pin worked across a floured table until the dough went thin as a bedsheet, then sliced into ribbons and laid out to dry over the backs of chairs. Dropped into rich chicken broth, they cooked up tender and silky, nothing like the boxed pasta that replaced them. This was Pennsylvania Dutch and Midwest farmhouse cooking at its most patient. Grandma's noodles had a chew and a richness from the egg yolks that no package could match. They faded the moment dried pasta became a pantry default, and the floured table went quiet. Number 28. Fried green tomatoes. Firm, unripe tomatoes sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until the coating crackled golden, and the tart green slice inside turned just tender. A garden thrift dish that used the tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before frost. It lived across southern and rural tables long before it became a movie title. Grandma salted them while they were still hot. They faded from everyday cooking as gardens shrank, surviving mostly as a nostalgic restaurant appetizer, a long way from the back porch skillet where they belonged. Number 27. Calf's liver loaf and the old organ meat suppers. Here history asks for honesty. Organ meats, liver, kidney, heart, were cheap, common, and central to whole animal home cooking through the mid-century, baked into loaves bound with breadcrumbs, egg, and onion. Records suggest these dishes fell away not from danger, but from changing taste and rising prosperity, as families could finally afford the cuts they preferred. Grandma made the loaf go far. Today, food safety guidance would simply remind cooks to handle and store organ meats carefully, as history, and not alarm. The loaf itself, sliced cold for sandwiches the next day, is a flavor most have entirely forgotten. Number 26. Johnny cakes. Cornmeal, salt, and boiling water or milk, stirred into a batter and dropped onto a hot greased griddle, hissing and spreading into flat, crisp-edged cakes with a tender, steamy middle. One of the oldest breads in America, traced through Rhode Island and New England colonial kitchens, the Johnny cake fed families when wheat flour was dear and cornmeal was plenty. Grandma served them with butter and molasses or alongside supper as bread. They faded as boxed pancake mix and store bread took over the griddle, and the simple corn cake slipped into history. Number 25. Boiled dinner. A whole afternoon in one pot, corned beef, or a ham hock simmered slow with cabbage, potatoes, carrots, and turnips until everything turned soft and savory, and the broth ran salty and rich. A New England and Irish-American Sunday tradition, it was the definition of one-pot thrift, and the leftovers became red flannel hash the next morning. Grandma let it bubble away while the family was at church. It faded as the long boil lost ground to faster meals, and the humble, steaming pot became a holiday memory rather than a weeknight habit. We're past the halfway mark now, and the dishes only get dearer. Let's pause the count for just a breath because something happened in those kitchens worth naming. The recipes we've passed so far, the croquettes, the dumplings, the long braise, they all asked for time and attention, and they were the first to fall. By most accounts, the shift wasn't that families stopped loving these flavors, it's that the afternoon disappeared. Mothers went to work, restaurants multiplied, and that aluminum tray promised supper without the standing and the stirring. The dishes ahead are the ones that clung on longest, the ones tied to a grandmother's hands so tightly that letting go felt like losing her. Pull your chair back in. Number 24. Number 24. Persimmon pudding. In the Midwest, when the wild persimmons finally softened to sweetness after the first frost, grandmothers gathered them and pressed the pulp into a dark, dense, spiced pudding cake, baked low until the edges pulled from the pan. It was a regional treasure of Indiana and the river valleys, made only in that narrow autumn window. Grandma served it warm with a spoon of cream. It faded as the wild persimmon trees grew harder to find, and the labor of gathering and seeding the fruit outpaced anyone's patience, leaving a deeply regional flavor known now to almost no one. Number 23. Homemade head cheese and souse. Honesty, again, gently. On butchering days, nothing went to waste, and the meat from a hog's head was simmered, picked, seasoned, and set into a savory jelly, sliced cold for sandwiches. Souse was the same idea, brightened with vinegar. The Smithsonian and food historians document these as cornerstones of thrift-driven, whole-animal home cooking. They were once common in the meat case and are rarely found today. Modern food safety guidance would emphasize careful handling, stated here only as history. Grandma made it because wasting any part of the animal was unthinkable, and that ethic, more than the dish, is what we've lost. Number 22. Mock apple pie. Here it is, the pie that fooled grown men. There are no apples in it. None. Nabisco printed the recipe on the Ritz cracker box in the mid-1930s, after Ritz arrived in 1934, though the trick itself reaches back to a version in the Saturday Evening Post in 1857 by the records. Crackers, sugar, water, lemon juice, and cinnamon simmered until they soften into something that tastes uncannily like spiced apple filling, poured into a crust, and baked until golden. It was depression magic that lingered for decades because it genuinely delighted people. Grandma made it as a party trick and a thrift miracle both. It faded when apples were never scarce again, and the wonder went with it. Number 21. Watergate salad and the molded fluff salads. A cloud of pistachio pudding mix, crushed pineapple, tiny marshmallows, and whipped topping folded into a pale green drift and chilled. It belongs to that great mid-century family of fluff and molded salads that crowded the buffet table. Grandma brought it to every potluck and reunion, and it sat proudly between the casseroles. These sweet, jiggly salads faded as tastes turned away from the gelatin and pudding, aesthetic, surviving now mostly as a nostalgic holiday curiosity that younger cooks eye with deep suspicion. Number 20. Chow chow relish. The pop and crunch of pickled garden vegetables, cabbage, green tomatoes, peppers, and onions, chopped fine and put up in jars with vinegar, sugar, and mustard seed. This was end-of-garden thrift, a way to save the last vegetables before frost, and brighten winter plates with a tangy, sweet, crisp relish. Grandma's pantry shelf gleamed with rows of it. It faded as home canning declined sharply through the convenience era, and the homemade relish gave way to the store-bought jar, losing that singular garden-bright snap. Number 19. Salmon loaf. Cousin to the croquette, but baked, canned salmon mixed, with egg, breadcrumbs, milk, and onion, pressed into a loaf pan and baked until firm and golden, then sliced and served with a creamy dill or egg sauce. It was an affordable Friday and weeknight main across much of the country, leaning on the ever-present can in the cupboard. Grandma topped hers with a ribbon of white sauce. It faded as fresh fish grew accessible and frozen seafood took over. And the humble, thrifty loaf disappeared from the weekly rotation almost entirely. Number 18. Hand-cranked ice cream. The rhythmic crunch of the crank, the ice and rock salt packed around the canister. The whole family taking turns on the back porch on a hot afternoon until the custard inside thickened to a soft, cold, vanilla-rich churn. This was summer itself, a dessert that doubled as a family event. Grandma cooked the custard base on the stove first, slow and careful so it wouldn't curdle. It faded the moment store freezers filled with cartons of ice cream for pocket change, and the sweaty, joyful labor of cranking it together became a memory of a slower season. Number 17. Corn fritters. Golden nuggets dropped into hot, fat, crisp, and craggy on the outside, sweet and tender with whole corn kernels inside, dusted with a little sugar or drizzled with syrup. A garden thrift dish that turned a surplus of summer corn into supper or a sweet side. It crossed every region and class. Grandma fried them in batches and the family ate them faster than she could lift them out. They faded as fresh corn became seasonal in a way frozen vegetables erased, and the fritter, with its hiss and its golden crust, slipped quietly off the table. Number 16. Tomato pie, not the pizza kind. A southern summer pie layered with thick slices of garden tomatoes, fresh basil, onion, and a topping of mayonnaise and sharp cheese, baked in a crust until bubbling and golden. This was peak season cooking, made only when the tomatoes were heavy on the vine and perfect. Grandma salted and drained the slices first so the pie wouldn't weep. It faded outside the South as garden tomatoes gave way to year-round grocery ones that never carried the same flavor, and the pie became a regional secret most of the country never tasted. 5 more before we shift gears. Number 15. Apple butter. A copper kettle over a low fire, apples cooked down for hours with cider, sugar, and warm spice until the whole batch turned deep mahogany and thick enough to stand a spoon in. The smell of cinnamon hanging over the whole house. This was an autumn ritual, often a community one, stirred constantly so it wouldn't scorch. Grandma put up dozens of jars to last the winter. It faded as the all-day stir and the home canning behind it became impractical. And the store jar, while sweet, never carried the depth of the kettle-stirred original. Number 14. Hot milk sponge cake. A tender, fine-crumbed cake, leavened light, and moistened with scalded hot milk stirred into the batter at the end, baked until golden and springy. It was a thrifty everyday cake, made with pantry staples and no fancy frosting, served plain with fruit or a dusting of sugar. Grandma made it when company came on short notice because the ingredients were always on hand. It faded as boxed cake mixes promised a fluffier result, with no skill required, and the gentle technique of the hot milk pour was simply forgotten. Number 13. Wilted lettuce salad. Tender leaf lettuce dressed while warm with a hot bacon dressing. The fat and vinegar and a little sugar poured sizzling over the greens so they collapsed and softened just so. The bacon crumbled on top. A garden and skillet dish of early summer made when the first leaf lettuce came in. It was thrift and flavor in one bowl, using the bacon grease that was never thrown away. Grandma timed it so the dressing hit the leaves at the table. It faded as bottled dressings and bagged salads replaced the warm skillet ritual, and the singular pleasure of wilted greens vanished. Number 12. Spoon bread. Somewhere between cornbread and a soufflé, cornmeal cooked into a mush, then lightened with beaten eggs and baked until it rose tall and quivering, golden on top and custard soft inside, eaten with a spoon. A Southern and Appalachian treasure, it was special occasion cooking that still leaned on humble cornmeal. Grandma served it steaming straight from the dish with butter melting into it. It faded as cornbread from a box took its place, and the gentle, soufflé-like technique grew rare, leaving spoon bread a regional memory most Americans have never spooned. Number 11. Stewed tomatoes with bread. Home canned tomatoes warmed slow with butter, sugar, salt, and torn bread that swelled and softened into the pot, a humble side that tasted of late summer canning and winter thrift. It used the jars Grandma had put up in August to brighten a January supper, and the bread stretched it further still. It was comfort and economy in one bowl. It faded as home canning declined, and the dish came to seem too plain for modern tables, slipping away with the rows of jars that once lined every cellar shelf. Number 10. We're into the heart of it now. Number 10. Rivel soup. A Pennsylvania Dutch treasure, tiny crumbs of dough, flour, and egg rubbed between the fingers into irregular little pearls, dropped into chicken broth or milk to cook tender, somewhere between a dumpling and a noodle. It was pure pantry thrift, made from nothing but flour and an egg, and it stretched a thin broth into a filling supper. Grandma made the rivels by feel, the size of barley or rice. It faded as the regional, hand-rubbed technique passed out of daily use, and rivel soup became a dish known almost only within the families who still carry it. Number 9. Date nut bread. A dark, dense, tender, quick bread studded with chopped dates and walnuts, often baked in a coffee can for a perfect round loaf, sliced and spread with cream cheese for afternoon tea or a lunchbox treat. It was a thrifty, keeping bread, sweet without frosting, that lasted the week wrapped in wax paper. Grandma soaked the dates in hot water first so the loaf stayed moist. It faded as packaged snack cakes and bakery breads replaced the homemade loaf, and the date and walnut classic, once on every tea table, grew genuinely rare. Number 8. Country fried steak with milk gravy. A cheap, tough cube. Steak pounded thin, dredged in seasoned flour, fried crisp in a cast-iron skillet, then smothered in a peppery white gravy made from the very drippings left behind. This was thrift turned into a feast, a way to make the least expensive beef taste like Sunday. Grandma made the gravy by feel, flour into the fat, then milk poured slow and whisked until it thickened. It faded as the long, hands-on frying gave way to faster dinners and restaurant versions, and the homemade skillet gravy lost its place at the family table. Number 7. Homemade yeast rolls. Cue the smell again, because nothing fills a house like rising dough. Flour, yeast, a little sugar and butter, kneaded by hand and set to rise twice before baking into soft, golden, pull-apart rolls that came out of the oven steaming, brushed with butter. This was Sunday and holiday cooking, the bread that signaled a real occasion. Grandma knew the dough was ready by the spring of it under her thumb. It faded fast as brown and serve and store rolls offered the look without the labor, and the all-afternoon ritual of the rising dough, by most accounts, was one of the very first home traditions to fall. Just over halfway gone now, and we're down to the dishes that define a grandmother. Number 6. Chicken fried rabbit and the wild game suppers. In rural and frontier-rooted kitchens, rabbit, squirrel, and other small game were dredged and fried much like chicken, a thrifty protein that came from the land itself rather than the store. Historians note these dishes were everyday fare across rural America well into the mid-century, a direct line to self-sufficient living. Grandma cooked what the men brought home and wasted none of it. It faded as supermarket meat made hunting for the pot unnecessary, and a whole tradition of land-to-table frontier cooking quietly closed, surviving now only in rural pockets and family memory. Number 5. Floating Island. A delicate dessert of soft meringue islands poached and set adrift on a sea of pale, silky vanilla custard, cool and trembling and barely sweet. It was an old-fashioned company dessert that showed off a cook's gentle hand, with eggs, elegant yet made from the simplest pantry staples. Grandma poached the meringue clouds in milk and floated them with care. It faded as quick boxed puddings and bakery desserts made the careful custard feel fussy. And Floating Island, once a treasured finale, drifted almost entirely out of the American kitchen. Number 4. Scrapple, a Pennsylvania Dutch icon and a monument to thrift. Pork scraps simmered down and bound with cornmeal, seasoned with sage and pepper, set into a loaf, then sliced and fried crisp and golden for breakfast, served with apple butter or syrup. Food historians document it as a pure, whole animal, waste-nothing dish, the kind that defined a butchering culture. Grandma fried the slices until the edges crackled. It survives in its heartland, but faded everywhere else as breakfast went to cereal boxes and drive-thrus, and the crisp, sage-scented slice became a regional treasure most Americans have never tasted. Number 3. Sunday fried chicken from scratch. Not a bucket, the real thing. A whole chicken cut into pieces, soaked in buttermilk, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried, piece by piece, in a cast-iron skillet of bubbling fat, turned by hand until each piece came out shatteringly crisp and golden. The kitchen fragrant for hours. This was the Sunday after church crown of the American table across every region and tradition. The dish a grandmother was known for. She fried it in the same skillet her whole life. It faded the hardest and fastest when the fast food bucket made fried chicken a 5-minute errand, and the all-afternoon skillet ritual, the one that drew the whole family home, slipped into memory. Number 2. Real homemade biscuits. Soft flour, cold fat cut in until the dough looked like coarse meal. Buttermilk folded in with a light hand, patted out and cut and baked until they rose tall, and split open, steaming, flaky in golden layers with a tender, cloud-soft middle. This was the daily bread of the southern and rural table, made fresh every single morning by hands that never needed a recipe. Grandma knew not to overwork the dough, that the secret was a gentle touch and cold butter. It faded as canned and frozen biscuits offered the shape without the soul, and the morning ritual of cutting biscuits by hand, once the heartbeat of a kitchen, grew quiet. Number 1. Sunday pot of dumplings, gravy, and the whole afternoon meal she carried in her head. The number 1 lost recipe isn't a single dish. It's the entire Sunday dinner she built from memory. The long simmered meat, the homemade noodles or dumplings, the biscuits, the from-scratch gravy, the pie cooling on the sill, all of it timed by feel so that everything landed hot on the table the moment the family walked in from church. There was no recipe card for the whole of it. It lived in her hands, and her hours, and her love, and it pulled 3 generations to one table every single week. This is what truly vanished when everyone started eating out. Not a dish, but a day. Not a flavor, but a gathering. Grandma's Sunday dinner asked for the one thing the modern world stopped giving, which was the whole afternoon. And when that afternoon disappeared, the meal went with it. So we lean back from the table now, and you can almost still see her hands, flour in the creases, a towel over her shoulder, the oven warm at her back. Remember that aluminum tray, the 10 million Swanson dinners sold in a single year, the moment the wooden spoon got set down. Look at what we counted: the croquettes and the dumplings, the scrapple and the spoon bread, the floating island and the Sunday fried chicken, all the way to that whole afternoon meal she carried in her head. By most accounts, these dishes didn't vanish because anyone stopped loving them. They vanished because the thing they all required, time, slow and unhurried and given freely, became the scarcest ingredient in the American kitchen. Restaurants multiplied. The takeout bag took the center of the table, and the recipes that lived in a grandmother's memory had nowhere left to go. But here's the quiet truth in all of it. Every one of these can be made again. The skillet still works, the flour still rises, and the afternoon, if you choose it, is still yours to give. So tell me down in the comments, which one of these did your grandmother make? the one that brings her kitchen rushing back the second you smell it. And if this stirred something in you, share it with someone in your family who remembers, because that's how a recipe survives, passed hand to hand, story to story, table to table. Pull your chair in. The kitchen's still open, as long as somebody remembers to cook.